Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The following interactive performance is a second-round entry in Chilling Tales for Dark Nights 2025 Evil Idol Voice Acting Competition. And you, listener, get to help decide who advances to round 3. Voting is simple. Following the performance, simply click the thumbs up icon on this video if you'd like this contestant to move forward, or the thumbs down if you'd like to see them be eliminated. Voting on this entry will conclude 1 week after the date of its posting. Thank you, and good luck to all of our contestants.
I have a skull in the corner of my office. It sits on a shelf a little above my eyeline. It watches me and fills me with great dread. I acquired it at an open-air bazaar in China. If you wish for a street or a city or some more definite form of location, I'm afraid I cannot give it to you. Already the memories fuzz around the edges in my head as I try to recall them. But at their center is a clear image I must never forget. So I write this to keep the molder from overtaking the whole. When I was in my 20s, I was fascinated with the world and its variety. Bored with school and its routine, I decided to forego my studies and take a more hands-on approach to life. I took the money I had saved for college and started a hitchhiking journey across the globe. I went everywhere: France, Spain, Italy, the Philippines. I even backpacked across India so I could better understand its people and cultures. But the crowning jewel of my travels was China. The Middle Kingdom, as it is sometimes called, fascinated me unlike any other place. Its culture and its history enthralled me. I wanted to know everything about it. It took years to get a tourist visa, but once I was there, I never wanted to leave. I was there for 2 years. In that time, I learned the language, traveled the countryside, and sought to learn everything I could. It was my dream to live there forever, or if that was impossible, at least die there. But then came the day I wandered into the other market. In a city I cannot now remember, there was a place where the locals gathered together to sell fresh produce and the most delicious street food, an open-air bazaar of sorts. The place was so friendly, so inviting, that I halted my trip entirely so I could stay longer in that beautiful place. While I was there, I chatted with the shopkeepers about their lives and their histories. With their words, they painted a rich tapestry of their culture, and soon I found myself calling many of them friends. They gave me tips on places to visit, good food to try, and on which market stalls sold the best products. I felt safe. I felt home. Then an incident occurred. It was a normal day. I had just purchased some ripe fruit from a familiar stall when I noticed something I had passed over many times before. It was a small side alley in the market, dark and thin, lying between 2 buildings. At a glance, I could see booths on the other side of the passage. I assumed it was another part of the market. Curious, I went closer to get a better look. I crossed the street and approached the opening. As I took my first steps into the gap, a stranger grabbed my arm and forcefully pulled me out. I was frightened. I turned to face my attacker. It was an old man. jowls hanging down to match the length of his abnormally large ears. His face was pockmarked with the remnants of forgotten diseases he had conquered, and his eyebrows grew so thick they hung low across his eyes like a fringe. His back was stooped and crooked, yet he walked with no cane. Judging by the hand on my arm, he was stronger than he looked. I expected an altercation, but instead of anger in the stranger's eyes, I saw pure, unadulterated fear. He glanced at the alley, and it was as if he were looking directly into the gaping maw of a blood-lusted shark. His words were scattered and hard to understand, but the stranger managed to communicate that the area was off limits. He kept side-eyeing the alley, edging away from it. Looking around, I noticed that most of the vendors were also giving it a wide berth. No one had set up shop in a 50-foot diameter area around the dark gap. Passers-by crossed the street when they came near it, holding their heads down and shuffling forward at a faster pace. "Do not go." Those were the stranger's parting words. He shuffled away, looking nervously behind him, as if the alley were going to pursue him. I took him at his word, at first, but even with the new fear I felt toward this strange passage, another feeling grew: curiosity. Each time I returned, my fascination grew. It was like a fungus on my brain. At first it was just double glances as I walked by. Then I began to think about the alley even when I was not there. Once the fear of it had subsided, I often stood across the street from it and tried to peer through to the other side. What was over there? I tried to ask my new friends about the alley. Each time I did, it felt like the air itself froze in place. Without hesitation, they each told me the same thing: do not go through it. One person, Hao Yang, I pressed a little harder for information. He sold fresh fruit, his specialty being peaches. I had gotten especially close to him over my stay there. "Why?" I asked. "Why should I not go over there? Isn't it part of the market?" Hao Yang tried his best to explain, but to me his words still felt cryptic. He told me the alley was the only way to get into that section of the city, a place he called the other market. He was right about that. In my own investigations, I had tried several times to find other openings, other paths into that section of stalls, but came up with nothing. The alley was the only one. Hao Yang went on to further explain that while there were people that did go inside on occasion, each time they did, they came back different. "There's nothing good over there," he said. "It's not worth it." Despite his warnings, my fascination grew. I was drawn to that alley, staring at it for hours and hours. My curiosity started feeling more like hunger. Many days I would strain my neck, trying to see what was happening on the other side. I just needed a glimpse, I told myself, and then I would be satisfied. One day, I got my glimpse. I was yet again staring at that damned alleyway. The impulse to explore overtook me like a fever. It crept down my body and made me tremble with desire. Emboldened by the feeling, I checked my surroundings for a moment. It was a busy day at the market. Everyone was preoccupied. No one was watching. Now was my chance. I made my way across the street and slid my way into the gap. It was colder than I expected in the alley. It had been a warm day, but I felt a chill as if I were passing through the deep shadow of a glacier. In the darkness, the sound of the world behind me became muffled. The street market hubbub faded to a dull murmur, then a whisper, then silence. When I had pushed through fully, it was as if the street outside no longer existed. I was in the other market. A tented booth was in the way when I got out of the alley. I moved my way around and got onto the street. My first observation? It was almost a mirror copy of the other bazaar. The same placement of booths, the same distance between vendors, even the same colors on the tents. But it wasn't entirely the same. There was something off. It was deserted of shoppers. I was the only customer there. Shopkeepers manned each booth, but they were the only other human beings in the whole place. Each stall sold a dizzying variety of goods, but it wasn't produce. Their shelves and stands were full of other strange items. Knives, dolls, symbols written on ragged material I couldn't identify. Across the surface of the nearest table were bones and devices with purposes I could not begin to understand. I was so taken by the goods that it took me a moment to notice the shopkeepers. All of them were smiling widely and focused directly on me. It was like each individual shop owner was standing ready for my business and my business alone. I reasoned that since I was the only shopper on the street, that made sense. But the more they looked at me, the more uneasy I became. Their smiles were empty, the kind you give for an extra % of gratuity. The kindness was transactional, and they were waiting from my side of the exchange. My curiosity had been sated. The feelings of danger were returning. I wanted to leave. Now. It took a moment for me to find the tent I had emerged behind. I went behind it, looking for the alley entrance so I could return to my home turf, filled with safety, friends, and food. When I looked where the alley had been, it took a moment to process what I was seeing. My heart sank into my stomach. It was gone. Where there had been a gap in the buildings, there was now a solid wall. It was like the buildings themselves had drawn together, closing the gap. You couldn't have stuck a knife in it, the crack was so tight. I looked up and down, hoping I had just misremembered the alley's placement. I hadn't. In my ever-frantic searching, I could find no openings of any kind. After combing over the block twice, the sun was getting low in the sky. I was desperate. I pushed through my discomfort and went to a booth owner. I asked how to get out of this market section. "Buy something," the woman said, her teeth glinting in the red glow of the sunset. Not sure how this was supposed to help me, I looked at the table and tried to find the cheapest-looking item. I picked up a small die with strange symbols painted on it in midnight black ink. I asked about its price. "1 leg." I was sure I hadn't heard her right. I asked again, and she responded the same. "1 leg." In the corner of the tent, I saw a dadao, a sort of Chinese machete. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The concept seemed so absurd, so unreal, but The owner confirmed my suspicions when she grasped the blade's handle and turned back to face me. "Would you like to pay now?" I quickly set down the die and backed away. The owner made no move to follow me. They just kept smiling and informed me they had many other goods to choose from, and they were open to negotiating price. I went to several other booths and asked for directions on how I could leave. All said the same thing: buy something. Each time I tried to select an item, the brutal prices were given with the same nonchalant attitude as the first. An eye, a hand, my genitals. They said this casually, as if they were simply speaking of different cash denominations. The sun had fallen by this point, and the sky was dark. It hung over me, a black expanse like a smothering blanket. There were no stars to tell direction. There was no moon. The only illumination came from the glare of the torches lighting up the wares and the twinkle of candles coming from the windows. The silence of the night was deafening. At any crowded street market, there is always a dull murmur of noise, an underlying layer that a patron may stand on to know that they are not alone. There is always some transaction, some exchange being made, and quiet is never allowed to linger long. That rule did not apply here. Soundlessness reigned. I could not even hear the breaths of the individual shopkeepers. I don't know if they even did breathe. They stared ahead at me, waiting. My purchase, it seemed, was the only thing that mattered. I started to panic. I began to try every method of escape. I ran up the length of the street, but just when I thought I had made a good distance from my starting point, I would find myself back where I had begun. I tried all the doors to the building, but they were locked. I went crazy with fear and tried to bash the wooden slats in with the heel of my foot. When I was finished, they still stood, resolute and unmarked. No longer caring for safety or propriety, I began to scale the sides of the buildings. My fingers scrabbled to find any foothold or handhold that would move me upwards. My fingers caught in the crevices, and at one point my fingernail was pulled out of my flesh by a jutting nail. I continued on, ignoring my bleeding finger. I had to get out. I needed to get out. Nothing else mattered. I managed to get to the roof. I stood atop it and saw the market on the other side. My market. My heart soared. My friends, my regular haunts, they were waiting down there and beckoning to me like sirens, and I, a sailor with a death wish. I quickly made my way down to the other side. When I dislodged from the wall and turned to face my freedom, my blood went cold. Instead of my friends, I saw those same strange booths, those strange, perverse shopkeepers smiling and waving, all waiting for me to buy. I was back. I had never really left. It was weeks before I broke down and bought something. Time became strange in the quiet. It passed like a fevered dream. I lived off the fetid pools in the gutter and caught rats that had the misfortune of being trapped in there with me. I ate their flesh raw, unable to purchase the fire starters sold 2 booths over from my makeshift hovel. It would have cost me my tongue to purchase after all. I couldn't part with that. At some point, the rats ran out, and the water dried up. I began to starve. I could see the bones in my forearms, and the constant gnawing of hunger began to drive me insane. I counted my ribs to pass the time. It was in my lowest that I had a sudden moment of clarity. It was the middle of the day, and the sun was beating me about the head with its heat. I had resorted to drinking my own urine, which had taken on a dark brown cast. It smelled foul. My mind was fractured, but one coherent thought shot through me, unifying the pieces for a moment. It was as if someone had spoken directly into my ear. I was going to die. I was going to die unless I bought something. The bargaining began. I went up the length of the street, shuffling on malnourished legs. It was painful, but it was possible. I greeted shopkeepers and began to haggle. I tried my earlier strategy of choosing cheap-looking items, but found that looks were deceiving. These often were the most expensive. One small handkerchief would have cost me all 4 of my limbs. I tallied up the cost of all the items, trying to determine what I was willing to lose so I could leave this place. The shop owners would not be talked down. If they wanted an arm, they might settle for a forearm, but never a hand. If they wanted a leg, a foot would never do. 5 fingers might become 4, but never 1. That was when I found a miracle. I found the skull. It looked like it could have belonged to some undiscovered species of monkey. That, or it was a human skull deformed beyond all comprehension. I had felt its gaze on me as I began my journey from booth to booth, trying to barter for my escape from this hell. Its presence had unnerved me so much that I had passed it over on my first journey up and down the street. On my second go-through, I reluctantly asked its price. 1 finger. The shopkeeper pointed upwards with his index. Ironically, I felt excitement. I had found it, the cheapest item. Its price was still steep. Had it been at the beginning of my stay at the other market, I would have balked at paying. But with starvation comes context, and a finger began to feel like a bargain. I almost agreed to the trade on the spot, but I made the mistake of looking at the skull again. Its empty sockets felt like 2 holes of unfathomable depth. As I looked, I imagined myself falling into them until my body and soul were dissolved in perpetual night. I hated it. Even in my weakened state, I wanted nothing to do with that skull. But my third journey up and down the street made me so dizzy, I had to sit down. I was running out of time. I went to the booth and agreed to the skull's price. I held my hand on the table and closed my eyes. I braced for the impact of the dadao. When nothing came, I opened them again. The shopkeeper had their hand extended, the handle of the blade facing towards me. The message was clear. I took the dadao and went about planning the best way to remove my finger. I considered a single chop, but I wanted to limit the damage done to the rest of my hand. I couldn't get the right angle from that vantage. Besides, I needed to do the chopping with my offhand. When I had gone to take the index finger from my left, the shopkeeper had shaken their head.
Other hand, the right one.
It took an hour, but I eventually settled on a course of action. I took a deep breath and pulled my index finger back in a sharp jerk. The pain reached me before the snap. I bit into my tongue, tasting fresh blood as I made sure there was a break in the bone by jerking my finger back and forth. The burning in my hand was white hot, and I felt the broken ends of bone grating against each other. I screamed into my closed mouth, trying to muffle the sound. Hoping that my adrenaline would keep me going, I took the dadaw and began sawing. Blood soaked out through the break in my skin and smothered the length of the blade. The weapon was sharp, but not razor. I pushed and pulled to help the blade sever the skin, muscle, and tissue, the last things keeping my finger on my hand, and me in this wretched place. At one point, the blade caught on a tendon, and I felt it rip from the supports of my hand, pulling out in a white string that dangled and jumped. I swallowed down bile and kept going. I had to finish. One final pull, and the finger pulled off from my hand in a spurt of blood. I threw it down on the counter and shoved my hand into my armpit. I needed to get out of here, and then maybe I could find a doctor who could stop the bleeding. The shopkeeper took their time, examining the finger, going over it again and again. At one point they took out a jeweler's glass and examined the severed end. I saw spots, and I dry-heaved. After 2 long minutes, the shopkeeper nodded. My offering was satisfactory. He extended the skull to me. "I don't want it," I told him. He just shook his head at me.
"You buy it. You take it."
I didn't have time to argue. I was an inch away from passing out from pain and blood loss. I took the skull in my good hand and shambled away. Somehow, I knew where to go. I made my way up the street. I found the tent where I had emerged from the alley. That all felt like an eon ago. I held my breath, praying the shopkeepers had not lied to me. My heart leapt. There was the alley, open. I could see the markets on the other side. I went as fast as I could to it, afraid I would blink and the alley would close. I threw my body into the slit and pushed forward with force. I kept waiting for some sort of resistance, some force to keep me in the other market. It never came. In a burst of speed, I left the alley. I was bombarded with a blast of shouting and haggling and complaining about subpar product. I was back. It might have been the joy of escaping, or it might have been that my ears had grown accustomed to the silence of the other market. Regardless, in my starved and broken state, it was all too much. My eyes rolled back into my head, and I collapsed in the mud. I awoke 2 days later in a small hospital. Hao Yang was sitting next to me. Apparently, despite my weeks inside the other market, No time had passed in the outside world. Hao Yang remembered seeing me eyeing the alley, and the next moment saw me emerging with my bloodied hand, looking half crazed and starved out of my mind. He knew what had happened immediately. He was the one who brought me to the hospital. On my bedside table was the skull. Hao Yang refused to touch it. He sat himself on the other side of the bed and tried his best never to look at it. He refused to speak of the skull or the bazaar when I began asking questions. Once he was sure I was recovering, he stopped showing up at the hospital. I think we frightened him, the skull and I. After being discharged, things changed. People avoided me, crossing the road at my approach. People that were normally friendly became nervous in my presence. The market, once a friendly place, now felt cold. No one talked to me unless I first addressed them. No one even looked at me if they could help it. Ironically, the only welcoming part of the market was the alley. It was always there, waiting, almost beckoning me to step through again. In those moments, I tried to remember what the other market had put me through, but it didn't stop the curiosity from digging into my mind like a bad itch. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I decided to go back to America. I had acquired no souvenirs on my world-exploring trip. I didn't have room for them. But the skull followed me home. I tried to leave it in 3 separate hotel rooms. Each time it would appear again in my bag, nestled comfortably in my clothes and watching me from the depths of my suitcase. On the boat home, I tossed it into the ocean. That night, when I came to my bunk, it was on my bedspread. A few drops of salt water graced its cranium, like a perverted aspersion. It stared up at me with those empty sockets, and I could feel something inside me withering. I stopped trying to get rid of it. It was better to just ignore it. Ignore the decay, ignore the rot. Just let it stay and fester, and hope that one day time will take it from you. When I returned, it found a new home on my office shelf. It must like it there, because it doesn't move around as much. It's been years since then. Years that I purchased with my finger at the other market. But even still, I am not free. My time is running out. I've finally discovered the true price of the skull. The fine print I passed over in my haste to pay the low price. The doctors are calling it early onset Alzheimer's. I know better. Memories run together now in my head, like wet paint splashed over my cortex. I no longer remember Spain, France, the Philippines. Even now I strain under the gaze of the skull to remember Hao Yang's face, the taste of fresh peaches at his market stall. The skull has left me only with my time at the other market untouched. But I know it will take that too in time. It will take all of me. Maybe if I hadn't been so stingy. Maybe if my survival had been worth an arm or a leg. Maybe then I wouldn't be paying the dividends. But it's too late now. A final bit of advice from a man senile by his own hand. Don't be cheap. It will cost you.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Steve Taylor. reminding you that if you haven't already, don't forget to cast your vote for this contestant via either a thumbs up or a thumbs down vote. New entries will be posted throughout this month. Be sure to tune in and vote for each of them and help decide who becomes the next Evil Idol. Until next time, turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.